Hey everyone, it's Sarah from Sass Series, and today I'm going to be doing another book chat. Today I'm talking about 3 horror novels. These horror novels are a YA, another YA, and an adult. So 2 YAs and 1 adult novel. I listened to 2 of them on audio and 1 I read as an e-arc. The first book that I'm going to be talking about is Nightingale by Amy Lukacs. I was first exposed to Amy Lukacs I think 1 year ago when I decided to pick up Daughters Unto Devils for Halloween, and I loved it. I read that book in like a day. I gave it, I think, 4.25 stars. It was such a really great YA horror western novel, and it was so creepy and weird, and I liked the atmosphere. Lukacs is a fantastic atmospheric horror writer. So Nightingale is, I think, her junior novel, and it's my second time reading her. I was excited, apprehensive, but excited, because I was anticipating this. I knew I would enjoy Nightingale, but I didn't know much about it. So it follows a girl who is living in the 1950s, and it really tackles the conventional society and oppression of women at the time. We follow 2 different timelines in her life. We follow one timeline where she is actively writing a science fiction novel where aliens come down and brutally torture her main heroine. And then we follow her in an insane asylum after this big event that we don't know about happens. And so these 2 timelines interact through her finding her way in the asylum and interacting with these intergalactic species, I'm going to say, and how this relates to her own horror sci-fi novel. It's really disturbing, really graphic. It has really good representation for mental health in asylums in the 1950s. It's also an LGBTQ novel. The main character is bisexual, and so there is like a love affair with one of the roommates. So like if you're interested in that kind of literature, that's an interesting take, especially because it's set in the 1950s and conventional eyes. But I didn't like the plotting of it because it was so random and kind of thrown in there, and I feel like if the novel was longer it may have worked well. And the way that the novel ended for me was mainly why I had trouble with the romance and the unfolding of everything. I really liked the novel that she was writing. It was graphic, it was horrifying, and it obviously hints that something has happened to her that's sinister, and you don't really know like if it's a traumatic event, if it's an alien abduction, like what has she experienced, what has she not. So it's an interesting novel, and Lukacs has fantastic writing here. So on that front, I really enjoyed it. And I recommend Nightingale. I think for YA horror fans, you may really get a lot out of it. I myself gave it 3.5 stars. And I have a full-length review for it linked down below. The next book that I'm talking about is a book that I listened to on audio called The Dark Descent of Elizabeth Frankenstein by Kristen White. So I read Frankenstein for my Brit Lit class at the end of 2018, and it left me feeling with a feeling of more. Elizabeth Frankenstein's story does everything that I wanted to be done in Frankenstein's original tale. It tackles this great concept of femininity with obsession, with manipulation, with psychopathy, and it just blends all these things together. So we're following these 2 lovers who are eventually newlyweds. You've read Frankenstein. If you haven't, well, it's obviously going to spoil the text for you, but it's her obsession with Frankenstein and his obsession with her, and the way that the story just unfolded, and the way that she goes on this quest to discover if he really is a murderer, and how she wants to hide it. It's really fascinating because the character arc that she has is a complete anti-hero character arc. There is nothing really redeeming about Elizabeth Frankenstein until the midway point when she really has like enough of it, and she actively moves forward with her own progression outside of the dominating obsession that she has for her childhood cousin, because they were raised as cousins under an adoptive, like, hey, I'll take care of you thing. And it was fascinating to see, especially the ending for me left so much closure, I think personally, with the way that Frankenstein ended, because we never really know what happens to one of the main characters in Frankenstein. We just know that he ends up passing, and I feel like this novel incorporated the concept of Frankenstein so beautifully, and it was shocking when I read it, because I was like, oh, she went there, and I loved it. I had wished that Mary Shelley went there, because I feel like that would have just really hit home the importance of the classic and the momentous build-up to this character arc that we have with the original Frankenstein novel. But alas, I believe that Kristen White did a fantastic job with character development. Character development is the sole and driving factor of this story, and for that alone, I was blown away. And the third and final book I'm going to be talking about that I read in the horror genre is an adult novel. I don't know if technically this is considered horror, but I'm going to consider it horror. It is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. This novel was getting a lot of, like, I don't want to say hype because it wasn't hyped up, but people were talking about it on BookTube, in the blogosphere, mainly on BookTube. That's where I saw it. I remember Books and Lala and Peter Likes Books had talked about it, and particularly Peter Likes Books said the audio was really good, and my library had the audio, so I decided to check it out. And The Cabin at the End of the World follows two fathers and their daughter, and they are kind of on a nice little retreat getaway when a man comes and starts talking to the daughter, and they strike up a little friendship, and then it escalates because the man pushes his way in, and then people show up and they say, one of you has to die to prevent the end of the world. And if one of you does not kill and sacrifice the other, then we're going to start killing ourselves. And you're going to see that everything that we say that with this prophecy is coming to pass through the television. It's wild. It's freaky. It's intense. I could not stop listening. I was like, oh my god, like, what's gonna happen? Like, I was in the car, in the passenger seat on the way to a family event, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is wild. And I just could not stop listening. Paul Tremblay sets up this suspenseful buildup of horror mixed with psycho, just criminal behavior, and you're not sure whether it's a real horror of the paranormal and the supernatural, or if it's a horror of people who've had a group mental break. And it's crazy, the story. I personally gave this novel 4.5 stars, and the reason that I did not give it a full 5 stars, despite how much I fully loved the novel, is because I did not like the ending. The ending for me was a huge letdown. It was an open-ended mess, and not in the way that an open-ended novel should have been left towards, in my opinion, just because this novel did not ask for an open-ended novel. This novel needed closure. It was written as a novel that needs closure. Now, if we had a sequel or maybe a novella, then I'd say, hey, like, okay, leave it to the wind. But the build-up that was taking place and going forward this whole time just shows that Tremblay had this great concept, but I wasn't sure if he wanted to go there, because the content is so dark and so disturbing that I feel like if he had went there, audience reception may not have been good. But of course, audience reception has not been good with the open ending. So, I don't know. I definitely recommend it despite the ending. Like, pick it up because the build-up and the novel itself is so good. Don't worry about the ending. If you've read novels that don't have good endings but are solid novels, then you know that the experience is sometimes worth more than the payoff. And the experience is so good, especially on the audio. So, out of these 3 books, I think that I'm going to recommend The Dark Descent of Elizabeth White the most. Let me know down below in the comments if you've read any of these three horror novels, if you're looking forward to reading them, and recommend me some horror novels. I'm always up for good horror audio or novel. Don't forget to subscribe. Bye, and happy reading!